For over 7 decades, the Catholic Church in Eastern Europe and Russia was targeted and persecuted by merciless communist regimes. Countless bishops, priests and religious were imprisoned, tortured and killed. Further east in China, millions of Catholics today still suffer under the country's notoriously draconian communist government. Clergy and religious are threatened and imprisoned, whilst many thousands of faithful often risk arrest themselves. From Eastern Europe, through Russia and the former Soviet states, and into China, aid to the Church in need is helping support the Catholic Church. UK Director Neville Kirk-Smith visited Siberia and Belarus, where in the face of great suffering, the Church is somehow triumphing after 3 generations of enforced atheism. In China, as UK press officer, I, Cecilia Bromley-Martin, witnessed the people's deep spiritual thirst, the courage of the country's oppressed Catholics, and their unfailing faith in God.
Welcome to Belarus, where the Church struggles for a new life, having endured the way of the cross for so long. In the Church of St. Rocha in Minsk, concerts are performed and Rachmaninoff songs rehearsed, with the altar pushed well out of the way. Yet, some churches in Minsk have now been restored, such as the Red Church, where young people come to pray. It seems that the dragon of communism may at last be being slain. With help from abroad, in this country that lies between Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine and Russia, the faith is now being proclaimed and the Church built up. Yet Lenin still looks on, and the KGB continues an active existence. But the good news concerning the Catholic Church in Belarus has to do with this holy man, Cardinal Sviante. His tiny upper room behind the cathedral is his bedroom, office and study. Cardinal Sviante was condemned to death and spent 10 years in the Gulag prison camps. But now, aged 85, he oversees the pastoral and spiritual rebuilding of the Church in this still Soviet land. The eccentric President Lukashenko, who dominates the whole of life in Belarus, claims a sort of religion. "I am an Orthodox atheist," he said. Yet, despite the bureaucratic controls and barriers, the cathedral has been rebuilt with the help of the benefactors of aid to the Church in need. Now young people come to Mass at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday evening, just one of the many Masses throughout the day. The floor was paid for by the benefactors of aid to the Church in need, and here over 300 people kneel at Mass in the early evening. This church had been turned into a cinema, theatre and sports hall, the crypt being turned into a shooting gallery. The cathedral was only returned in the spring of 1994 after candle-lit prayer vigils on the streets outside. Now, once again, God is present in the Blessed Sacrament, and the young people come to discover a new way. Cardinal Sviante's vision of bringing the faith to many through the young is possible. He told us, "There has been a Chernobyl of the soul here, but the children have not been vaccinated with atheism. They are still open. Now, with your help, it is possible to reach the souls of the people." The faith is being taught. The young come to pray and consider their vocations. Children pray at the sides of their mothers or grandmothers. Temporary churches are being erected like this one in Lida, where people still work the land in a way they have for the last 100 years. Yet, now amongst the Soviet flats, the foundation cross of a new church stands, and priests like Father Joseph Pravda bring hope to the people. There are 1,800 Catholic families in this parish in Lida, and in the last 18 months there have been 340 First Communions, and the new church under construction is urgently needed. Father Joseph was born in Grodno in 1960. He escaped from the Soviet army to work on a collective farm, and only saw his first Bible in 1990. He told us, "I was age 30 when my mother went to my grandmother's funeral in Poland and brought a Bible back. It's God's way that 9 years later I am a priest here in Lida." In another parish in Lida, Father Stanislav is looked after by his mother and assisted by nuns. The bell will soon ring out new life for the church and people. A large church has risen from the rubble of these outskirts and will shortly be completed with the help of the benefactors of aid to the church in need. It is only through the young that we can reach all ages, we are told time and time again. And on catechetical camps, officially run as secular summer camps, we found the happiest children anywhere in Belarus, singing, playing, sharing friendship, discovering life, and helping each other as they learnt about God's love. Another individual stands out amidst the rubble of life in Belarus as the church rebuilds: the outstanding figure of Bishop Alexander Kaskiewicz, Bishop of Grodno. His seminary has 120 future priests, the youngest being aged 17. They have heard the word of God and are preparing to go and work in God's vineyard. The gospel is being proclaimed, and priests who themselves have suffered in Siberia and Kazakhstan now teach the faith to the young. One such priest is Father Jerzy Lewinsky. His grandfather died in Siberia, and his father died in Auschwitz. With other priests, he worked in Kazakhstan and was himself imprisoned for 6 years. "I was never going to apologize for being a Catholic priest," he said. "I suppose I am the living witness to the Church rising from the ashes of persecution." Father Jerzy teaches Latin and canon law in Grodno Seminary, a seminary built with the help of the benefactors of this Catholic charity. And so the miracle of God's love is being proclaimed in temporary and new churches. Priests like Father Mick, who was supported by Aid to the Church in Need when he was a seminarian in Poland, are now building churches in Belarus. His church at Skidel will soon have these crosses on top, and the tower will stand out amongst the new flats in a huge new suburb of Grodno. The foundation stone has been blessed by Pope John Paul II. Elsewhere, Father Richard has built his church at Mosti with the help of the benefactors of this charity, and his own volunteers have done much of the work. Now the church is just about to open, and the volunteers finish the plastering and take a well-earned break on the Saturday lunchtime. The Orthodox Church is also being restored. Father Richard said, "Thank you from all my heart. Through the sufferings and trials of people here, may you and your families, for your kindness, be blessed 100-fold." Bishop Alexander has the help of many sisters, including the Schoenstatt sisters. Sister Maria and Sister Danita help with the catechetical work in the diocese. Sister Eva of the Sisters of Nazareth is building up community life once more, with young novices happy to follow a sacred life of prayer and service to God. As Sister Eva said, "Thank you for all your help. Here we have many vocations, but no room. In the West you have room, but no vocations." Many young girls like Irena, praying here with Sister Renata in Slonim, consider their vocations. Sisters teach the faith to the young, and the witness of the martyrs, such as the Sisters of Nazareth in Novgorodok in 1944, continue to inspire the young. At least some churches, closed for nearly 50 years, are open once more, like this church in Novgorodok, which was closed for 47 years and used as a shop. Even the older, more rural communities attract vocations. One order has over 50 Belarusian young novices and sisters, and even the elderly can be looked after. Yet the teaching and preaching of the faith is so important, and Father Tadeusz Krystopik runs the Diocesan Publishing Media Office. This is supported by Aid to the Church in Need and helps produce vital booklets, like all of these produced with the help of ACN's benefactors. These are used to teach the faith in parishes and to prepare catechists who come to stay for weekend courses every fortnight. Father Tadeusz said, "Aid to the church in need has been helping a lot. This material help brings spiritual succor to the souls of our poor, needy people." Devotion to Our Lady has helped many keep the faith in secret. In Grodno, the churches are opening up and being restored in a land where over 2 million died between 1930 and 1950. The symbols of Soviet life remain, like the T-34 tank that liberated Grodno in 1944. The seminary church shines out in the background. All of the people suffered, but the Jews, who made up nearly 1/3 of the population of 10 million in Belarus, were almost completely extinguished. The old synagogue in Grodno is now being restored, and like the churches, bears witness to a new hope in this land furrowed with suffering. The wonderful Fani Cathedral, dedicated to St. Francis Xavier, was part of the old Jesuit monastery. The main monastery is now a prison for nearly 1,000 criminals. And in this church no masses were allowed for 28 years, but the restoration of the church is almost now complete. As Bishop Alexander told us, "One time when I came here on the Sunday, the cathedral was full of people. The organ was playing, but I could not reveal that I was a priest, and no mass was allowed. Yet someone was reading from the Bible." The faithful kept their cathedral open. Now, even at 7:30 on a Sunday morning, old and young alike crowd into Mass. The way of the cross is still endured by so many in this land, where most people earn so little, and where the KGB continue to monitor the activities of the people. But Christ points the way to hope for so many, and the Diocese of Grodno has even been able to buy over a failed development in order to turn it into a diocesan centre for catechism, training, administration and Caritas social help. It just so happens that it is on Karl Marx Street. The Jesuits had owned this site too, but next door to this there is still a psychiatric home on old church property. The church, of course, has to buy back whatever it can from the authorities. 20% of Belarus's population are Catholic, and slowly they are being summoned back to the faith. In Yuzhny, an altar boy rings a bell for Mass, calling the people to God once again. The churches may seem big to us, but they are the sign of a church rising from the ashes of persecution and oblivion. As one religious brother said, "We cannot do pastoral work without buildings." This building in Volkovysk is a wooden structure from the 1920s and was taken by the authorities and turned into flats for 8 families. Now it has been handed back over, and 300 people come here and try to squeeze into Mass every week. But the church is totally rotten and has recently been condemned. They need a new church for the faithful here. One beautiful church in Kremenica was saved from desecration and restored. Father Matti now thanks God that there are new vocations, 3 seminarians and 2 novices in this one country parish. The roof of the church was replaced with the help of Aid to the Church in Need. So the faith is being taught throughout Belarus with the help of the benefactors of this Catholic charity. And the young come to pray and thank God, remembering all the benefactors in their prayers. On the collective farms on a Sunday afternoon, the reality of life and the daily struggle is obvious. This is today in Belarus, where a teenage boy helps load the hay cart by the side of a deserted dual carriageway. But, as Bishop Alexander said about the way of the cross which is still being endured, the church in Belarus suffered so much. The church was put to death. We do have problems, but the real reason for joy and hope is that so many good things have happened. Churches have opened, and we have our seminary. This is due to the prayers of the babushkas and the martyrs. Thank you from all the faithful of Grodno to all the benefactors of aid to the Church in need for everything they do. You are assured of our constant prayers. Further east, in Yakutsk, Siberia, over 3,000 prisoners per day arrived in exile in the 1930s to go on to the Gulag prison camps. 15% of them never even made it this far, and 90% never returned. Yakutsk was the hub and distribution point for all the gulags. The Church of the Saviour was used as a prison and interrogation centre. But now the church bells ring out the faith again over the river Angara. Icons are being restored, and the iconostasis rebuilt in the churches which are being reconstructed. This sacred art is bringing the hope of the resurrection to a people who have suffered so much. Not only is the Orthodox liturgy being celebrated, but the Mass is being offered in the Catholic churches which are being restored. Here in the Catholic Church in Yakutsk, Mass is being offered in a small chapel allowed for use during the week. Father Ignacy Paulus offers Mass served by a young altar boy. The church is still owned by the authorities, but the Catholics are now going to build a new cathedral and pastoral centre with the help of Aid to the Church in Need. Devotion to Our Lady unites both East and West, and the old chapels used by the Orthodox look out over the land. Old rituals such as pagan shamanism are being revived in a pseudo-intellectual interest in New Age spirituality. A religion becomes a historical subject for the curious, even if the Secret Service and military seem to oversee so much of life, even on the shores of the beautiful Lake Baikal. Here on the lake, so many people died in the depths of the water trying to cross the frozen ice in the winter. Now it is a beauty spot which should be visited by thousands, but is largely deserted apart from a few old babushkas selling bottles of vodka and orange to make a few rubles in order to exist. The beauty of Lake Baikal can be seen in the early morning passing along the Trans-Siberian Railway, and churches like St. Nicholas's Church in Sviante are now open for the liturgy to be celebrated once more. The lake contains ommel fish and even freshwater seals, and in the mists of time, near to the border between Russia and China, the only route is along the Trans-Siberian Railway, with its beauty and taiga. Travelling this route, snow-topped mountains are visible even in the summer, whilst little hamlets nestle next to the old collective farms. Odd religious and old babushkas sell their wares at stations along the way, and the train goes relentlessly on across thousands of miles in a land larger than the mind can imagine. There are odd stops at remote stations. The old lady laughs and says, "The terrain out there is beginning to worry me more than the devil." Old transit camps and remote communities line the route. Bridges are guarded. 20 million came this route to a frozen hell. Yet, even now, just across the border in China, similar laogai camps are still used today to torture and persecute those deemed to be against the state. Here, Stalin even set up a special Jewish area in Belarus, and the name of the town is still in Hebrew transcript. Only 15,000 Jews remain here now, most having died in the swampy, mosquito-infested land. What do the young Russian children have to look forward to? Is this a new dawn? Is the sun setting on the old Russia? Only a drink from the samovar of tea, or more likely from the bottle of vodka, seems to help many. Yet the Church is beginning to offer hope. Here in Khabarovsk, nuns are teaching the faith. Little children come to the liturgy. Children attend catechetical classes and the faith is taught. The old babushka sits waiting for God and eternity. The cupolas are about to be lifted on top of a new church in Khabarovsk. Yet the sects from America are investing funds into building, trying to take the people away from their long-lost Christian heritage. However, amidst the rubble, devotion remains. The protecting veil of Our Lady has helped the faith of the people. Priests and sisters discuss the way forward. Young Russians with their dogs, odd clerics in cars and militia vans alike seem to sum up a peculiar existence in this land. We endured a trip to Vladivostok with the militia, a once-in-a-lifetime experience, where we broke down 3 times. Dawn came up over the Far East as we arrived at Vladivostok airport, where you are told that you cannot take guns or explosives on the plane. Yet the beauty of the land as we flew 4.5 hours north to Yakutsk was quite amazing. The wide river Lena welcomed us. We found in Yakutsk some marvellous witnesses to hope here in the northeast of Siberia. Witnesses like Bishop German of Yakutsk, who said, "It is really not holy Russia here anymore. Too many generations have gone. The problem with modern Russia is that people have forgotten about God and left him. We need faith." And Bishop German is building up the church in faith and hope with the help of the benefactors of aid to the church in need. Another heroic witness to the faith is Father Pravda, a Salesian. Father Joseph Pravda has been running a Salesian mission in Yakutsk for 8 years. They have built a centre where the youth come here in coldest, darkest Siberia. Here about 20% of the population were Catholic before the revolution, and now the Catholic Church is offering hope in this frozen spiritual wasteland. This Dodge city of the north has pipes above the frozen ground, trying to keep the people warm through 8 months of solid winter, when the temperature averages -30 degrees. Yet the children come to learn about God's love with the Salesians, and these Catholics are trying to warm the souls of the people and bring the faith to all through the young. Nearly 150 children come to the clubs which they run every day, and nearly 50 come to Mass daily. Aid to the Church in Need's Child's Bible is used to teach the faith, even cut out for My Catechism. Father Pravda drives around in an old army van. In the summer, the midges and huge insects are a threat to everyone's health, even if the mammoths no longer threaten and are of purely frozen historical interest. The problems of this land have been immense. Hundreds of thousands died in the cold in the camps or digging minerals out of the frozen ground. Here, the buildings and people look almost as drunk as each other. 50% of the men are alcoholics. Old buildings collapse into the ground, whilst all new buildings have to be built on stilts. The people and society have to be held up in one way or another in order to survive at all. Lenin still looks on. And in the summer there are no nights at all, as the sky remains light throughout the early hours. One sign sums up reality. Outside an old cinema, it says, "Today," and there is nothing. "Tomorrow," and someone has placed an empty bottle. "This is my Gethsemane," said Father Pravda. But he is helping to bring the hope of the resurrection to these people in a frozen and isolated land. At least he and Bishop German are offering heavenly hope rather than the oblivion of alcoholic poisoning. The beauty of the land is deceptive and very threatening. It takes 6 hours to fly from Yakutsk to Moscow, and Bishop German can only afford to do that by persuading a friendly pilot to let him sit next to him on the flight deck. Yet, there is now growing hope that the faith can cross between East and West. On our way back from Siberia, we called in at the New Jerusalem Monastery in Istra, just outside Moscow. This has monks once more. The monastery was blown up by the Germans and rebuilt by the Russians. The site has once more been handed back to the Patriarch, and many pilgrims come to renew their faith in this monastery, constructed by Patriarch Nikon in 1656. There is a doorway of hope here. For, as Abbot Nikita said, what we need is optimism in Russia. I welcome the initiative of Aid to the Church in Need to help us. And this comes at such a vital time. It is both surprising and encouraging. We are pleased to see you, and we keep in touch, not for financial reasons, but because it is so important for us and our faith. We stand together with him and our brothers and sisters in Christ, trying to witness to Christ in both East and West.
But the suffering church is not a thing of the past. For a seminarian in China, daily life is far from easy. 12 of them share one room, sleeping on old iron bunks, with little bedding to insulate them during the bitter winters. Food is scant and extremely basic, books are few. Yet every year, more and more young Chinese men feel called to serve God as priests. Even the minor seminaries are flourishing. 50 years of communism in China have utterly failed to stamp out the Catholic Church. Bishop Li Duan of Xi'an was in prison or labour camps for a total of 19 years between 1954 and 1979. During this time, his cathedral was used as a sugar factory. Yet today he has about 200 students at his seminary, and the province has 4 religious congregations for sisters. Xi'an is a poor diocese, but others are even poorer and simply cannot afford to pay the £200 necessary to train, feed and accommodate each seminarian per year. Some bishops never have money, he told us. Some can't pay at all. Throughout China, Aid to the Church in Need supports hundreds of young men who, without our aid, would never be able to answer the call to God's altar. Bishop Bernardine Dong is now in his 80s. He is one of China's living martyrs. From 1963 to 1979, he endured forced labour in a factory. For many of those years, he had to wear a sign saying anti-revolutionary, and everyone was allowed, even encouraged, to beat him. Though forbidden to pray and watched all the time, at night he managed to say the rosary on his fingers under the blanket. Thanks to his faith, he resisted and survived. I trusted in God, he told me. With God's grace, I never gave up. When he was released, only the 4 walls of his church remained. Yet today it is alive with the faith again. First Mass on a Sunday is at 6 a.m, and later in the day it is packed for the Stations of the Cross. Every day the church is filled with the heartfelt singing of those who come to the 7 a.m. Mass before going to work. But the day-to-day life of the church is hampered where possible. The authorities live in the bishop's house. They are inescapable and they stamp their mark on all church life. During my visit to Wuhan, there was a retreat for the diocesan clergy. The moving masses these 22 priests concelebrated with Bishop Dong were a testimony to the church's courage. The sisters, always present at these masses, were a reminder that Chinese nuns did not escape the terrible persecution of recent decades either. Hundreds were imprisoned, tortured or killed, particularly during the Cultural Revolution. Sister Ju is nearly 100 and has lived through it all. Yet no amount of persecution could take away her faith, and like so many other sisters, she came straight back to her convent the moment the authorities permitted it. Like the seminarians, Chinese sisters live very simple lives and work long, hard hours. They get about 10 days holiday every other year, and their living conditions are often desperately basic, with no heating or warm water, even in the depths of winter. Yet it is very rare for sisters to leave religious life. As one said to me with a smile, "It is very difficult, but I am happy." For non-Christians in China, the sisters are curious. They do not understand the idea of an unmarried woman. And not all these young women's parents have consented to their vocation, but they come anyway. In the face of such misunderstanding, family rifts and daily hardship, why, I asked them, did they become sisters? For the glory of God and to save souls, I was told. Although poor and oppressed, the official Catholic Church is at least permitted and tolerated by the authorities in China. And though many of its clergy and lay are secretly loyal to the Pope, in public they remain answerable to the Chinese government. It is a different story for the outlawed underground Catholic Church, which maintains absolute loyalty to the Vatican. After many hours driving through the bleak and barren countryside, our faces covered as we tried to blend into the seats at toll booths or in small towns, we arrived after dark at a remote, tiny house belonging to a poor peasant farmer. This courageous man, one of China's millions of underground Catholics, was risking everything by lending one of his outhouses to a clandestine bishop and his community of seminarians. At 4 o'clock in the morning, we crept across the deserted farm to the low, dank room which had been converted into a chapel. Here we found 20 young men on their knees, deep in prayer in front of the altar. For security, these men are unable to leave that tiny compound during the whole 2 years they spend in the bishop's community. Their breakfast is a sort of porridge, dinner is vegetables, but twice a week they live on just bread and water. They never get meat or eggs. The rooms are minute and unheated, and up to 12 of them share one large concrete bed. They get fresh water every 2 days, and one demonstrated how, in winter, they have to break the ice on their plastic water bowl before being able to wash. They pray for 9 hours a day, with breaks to exercise, eat and study. It is, they admitted, a tough life, especially at the beginning. When they do sometimes feel the poverty strongly, they turn to prayer for strength. I asked them if they were afraid, and they all laughed and shook their heads and said, "Christ himself suffered, and it may happen to us too, but it's nothing new, it happens." This sentiment was echoed by all the secret Catholics we met in China. Sisters illegally teaching the faith to children. Seminarians who sleep, pray and study in the same one room. Priests whose makeshift altar is a dilapidated cupboard decorated with ferns and an old drinks can. "We trust in God," they all told me. "If we devote ourselves to the Church, God will help us." China's appalling one-child policy is brutally enforced, so handicapped children are almost always abandoned. While the state orphanages may refuse to take them in, I visited an orphanage run by Catholic nuns who accept, baptise and care for any child left on their doorstep. Though untrained and desperately understaffed, the sisters show these unwanted children love and kindness. Now it looks likely that the orphanage will be forced by the state to close. Who knows what will happen to all those unwanted children? But Aid to the Church in Need is still able to help the children of China learn about Christ. With our child's Bible now translated into Chinese, we have already sent 100,000 of these little Bibles to be distributed among Catholic children. For many families, it is the only book they will ever possess. In Beijing, Chairman Mao still watches over Tiananmen Square. The devastating legacy of his atheistic regime still reaches the furthest corners of this enormous country which has suffered so much. But with 12 million Catholics in China, a number which grows steadily through many thousands of conversions every year, the country's spiritual thirst is evident. Though they may lose their jobs, their homes, their churches or their freedom, though their children may be refused education, their pilgrimages hampered and their shrines destroyed, China's Catholics remain steadfast in their faith. We have promised to keep helping them.
From Latin America to Africa, throughout Eastern Europe, on through Russia and Asia to China, Aid to the Church in Need supports over 16,000 projects every year. Seminarians are trained, priests and religious supported, churches and chapels are built or restored, religious programs are broadcast on radio and television, Bibles and religious literature are printed, refugees are helped the world over, and more than 34 million child's Bibles have been printed and distributed worldwide in over 110 different languages. The needs of the Church have changed, but they are as great as ever, and wherever the faithful are suffering, it is through your prayers and sacrificial giving that aid to the Church in need is able to help. As our founder, Father Verenfried van Straten said, they are being tested in faith. We are being tested in love.